Hey guys, it's James from Architect and Developer. Today we're going to be talking with Rob Umble from Hybrid Arc. We're going to be talking through a number of different strategies that Rob has dealt with through the number of years, from using an FHA construction loan to finance his own house with very little money down, something I think a lot of people here are interested in, to an early project that wasn't quite as successful as Rob might have hoped financially, but ultimately was just part of a long chain of projects that have resulted in years of success for Hybrid Arc, to working with local homeowners, capitalizing on the equity in their own property to redevelop the neighborhood where they're themselves not displaced and they get a little bit of editorial control on what gets built around them. I think it's a great conversation with a lot of information to unpack, something for all of us to learn. So let's go ahead and get on with it with Rob Umble. Let's go. Rob and I met briefly while we did a talk at Harvard's GSD about 2 years ago on the Architect as Developer, along with Jonathan Tate and AJ Piers of Alloy and another woman out of LA, I believe, which is really great. And I got to hear a lot about your work there, which really, there's a few things were like super interesting that I've not met other people doing, such as the 203K loan, which I guess, or the FHA construction loan, which I think is in the house that you're in right now, right?
Yeah. I'd use that to build my own house.
Yeah, which I think a lot of people have are interested in, but it's I've only met one other person to actually do it as an architect because it seems like a really easy barrier, or not, I don't want to say easy, but a low barrier to entry compared to other avenues of sort of creating your own work or initiating your own work. And then also you had you spoke about at Harvard, you had spoke about the project where you were approached or you worked with a couple who owned a house but wanted to stay on the property, but didn't want some developer tearing the house down and building a bunch of townhomes, which I think was the Walker project.
Yeah, the
Um,
Walker townhouses, that's exactly it. And that's still something we do. I mean, I think for any, developer starting out, kind of access to capital is a single biggest challenge probably. So, those are a couple avenues that we've done it. One is build a house for yourself, through an FHA loan, which I did during the Great Recession, which allowed me to pay myself to be my own construction manager, you know. So ended up, yeah, and at the end of the project, of course, got a house that I still live in. And then
was that
second is, go
was that
ahead.
where you really started though, or was the entrepreneurial spirit the sort of shipping container project that you got HGTV to kind of like fund?
Well, I don't know. I guess I could give a quick synopsis of the history of hybrid. I guess I did always have an entrepreneurial spirit, and I graduated from college in 1993 and got a license in 1999, just as kind of quickly as I could work through the intern process, and basically started working for myself as Robert Humble Architects in 1999. And it had built that business where I had a few employees and a lot of work, but it's kind of started the business just with referrals and with clients. And after doing that for several years, wasn't, the portfolio where we were developing wasn't particularly inspiring. And I could just see that kind of, that your next project's only, is a reflection of your last project, basically. And that's typically a reflection of your developer clients.
Yeah.
So a friend of mine, Joel, we were invited to form a competition to study the Alaska Viaduct or the waterfront here in Seattle when the viaduct was going to be torn down. And instead of asking a bunch of our architecture friends to join the team, we kind of reflected and said, well, maybe we should kind of build a team based on values that we think are important to Seattle. So we ended up recruiting a lot of people who were thought leaders in these values of urban ecology and sustainability and art and community. And we had the city historian. And that was really fundamental to kind of approach a project, a value-based project. And part of that study resulted in what we kind of called the creation of Cargo Town, which was a kind of a relocatable, building system essentially, built from cargo containers. And actually, Cargo Town was actually on a shipping terminal that was leased to a big shipping company. That lease was coming up, and we thought maybe this is a way that we could kind of repopulate this very industrial part of town with a kind of an appropriate building system. So there was then, and there is still, frankly, now, a huge public interest in cargo container things, and we continued to pursue that for a few years and got published in a lot of things. And yeah, I did a couple television shows. And I personally always kind of saw it as kind of a lark, and thought that containers are interesting, but to really change the world with containers isn't going to happen. But we use that as a jumping off point to do modular and really build the foundation then of hybrid architecture, which eventually was able to gather some clients whose values were reflective of our own. And I was able to kind of close my original firm, Robert Humble Architecture, probably in 2003 or 4. So hybrid architecture really kind of started on a foundation of values, and we were doing a lot of modular work, and a lot of people in general contractors had no idea how to put together a modular project when it shows up on site. They just, what are the pieces like? What do I need to do? How do I bid it?
Yeah.
What needs to be complete on site? And we'd always end up asking a lot of those questions, or answering those questions, as well as arranging for trucking and shipping. So we kind of said, why don't we just become a general contractor ourselves? So that's where we started hybrid assembly, which was really to initiate to assemble modular components. And then, I also still, once again, had this entrepreneurial spirit and was disappointed by my initial, clients and developer clients in Robert Humble Architecture and their lack of imagination or spirit. So, around that same time, we also began hybrid development, which, really kind of took the reins in our own hands and be able to develop small infill projects that we felt were not being explored or exploited, from a design standpoint in the city of Seattle. So probably about 5 or 6 years ago, Joel and I split, and I sold my interest in cargotecture.com to him, and I bought his interest in architecture and assembly. So I've been doing it as a sole owner of those businesses for the last several years.
And were you saying that your initial seed money of how you started doing development was because you renovated a house with someone else? Like, was it your cousin?
Yeah, that's true. How did I get my money to begin this? I had a cousin that had recently gotten divorced, and I was single at the time, and I wouldn't, even back then, we couldn't afford to buy a house by myself. So I think my cousin and I went in and bought this beautiful craftsman house that had been neglected for probably 50 years and lived in it for 3 or 4 years while we spent all of our waking hours, it seemed, when we weren't working, we were painting or siding or doing something. And basically, after 3 or 4 years, we sold that house, and I guess we each got maybe $70,000 from it. And I immediately took that money and partnered with a friend of mine and bought a lot in the city of Seattle that eventually became the Remedy Court townhouses. And then that was very interesting timing, where we were literally under construction of that project when, I think we were in the middle of framing it, when the banking system collapsed in 2008. My loan provider, my bank, ended up going belly up.
Oh, God.
There were tons of developers in town that also went belly up. And we stuck to our values of doing a really nice project and a differentiated project, maybe more importantly. And as a result, we priced it frankly competitively, and we actually sold all of our units out in about a month, 30 days or so. And, when all the accounting was done at the end of the project, we probably lost $15,000 a piece. But maybe from that $70,000 that I had put into it, almost 3 years later, I got back $55,000. And I took that money and made a down payment on the land that I'm sitting on now for my house. And then once again, I kind of, through the permitting and construction of my house, made it through the rest of the recession. And then probably in, maybe 2013, we got the Walker townhouses, that land, under contract. and probably sold in 2015 or so. And that one did actually very well economically, and it was kind of a springboard to everything we've done since. But the Walker too was like the people that owned that land, they had a little, probably an 800 square foot cottage or bungalow on one little corner of the property. They had been approached by other developers to sell their property to do maybe 6 big townhouses on it. Me and a friend of mine, who knew them personally, thought we could do something more creative. So what we ended up doing was keeping their house, building 7 smaller townhouses kind of around it, and including one of them that they ended up moving into. So they literally never did get displaced from their lot. They were able to kind of realize the equity in their land that they had achieved over the 30 or 40 years. And instead of selling their land and having to then go find something else to buy in the neighborhood, which can be hard.
Yeah.
We ended up kind of giving them the pick of the litter in custom design one of the units for them. And they stayed in the existing house during construction. And when we got certificate of occupancy, they literally moved next door. And we then gave their house a paint job and sold it too.
Wow. So they were able to basically downsize their home without having to change their address or moderately changing their address and keeping where they lived and everything else the same.
And these guys were really pillars of the community. Bill was he was an attorney, very involved in land use issues and rewriting some of the development code in this neighborhood, over the preceding 20 years to encourage walkable neighborhoods. And actually I got to know him because we were both members of the Squire Park Community Council, which was the neighborhood where I lived and where he lived.
Wow. That sounds like a really good. So was the lot able to take on that? I mean, I guess it was, but how was it able to be so dense? Like it really has a lot of lot coverage.
Well, in Seattle, they do encourage, the retention of these existing structures because they keep the streetscape, they keep the character of the neighborhood. So you kind of have a max floor area ratio that you can build to on any given lot, or basically the amount of, developable square footage that you can build as a percentage of the lot size. So the existing structure didn't count toward floor area ratio. And then you can also do a partially below grade story that doesn't count toward floor area ratio. And so really what we did the new units were kind of on 4 levels. You had this partially below grade level, which kind of has the advantage of kind of raising the front door of the entry level, maybe, 4 feet or so above the pedestrian zone to give it some privacy. And then we created the bottom 2 levels and became what we called a flex space. So there was a way that you'd have a front door and a back door, and the back door you could close off the lower 2 levels from the upper 2 levels. And with separate entries and kind of a lockable door between them. And that's kind of something we've continued to do in all of our developments, really, is the opportunity for this flex space that can allow for, when we started it, people would use these as little accessory dwelling unit apartments. Then Airbnb became a thing. We've had buyers who have really worked the Airbnb economy and been able to pay 100% of their mortgage during the high season and half the mortgage during the low season. Of course, over the last couple of years, people are using these spaces as home offices. So that's been kind of another, another quirk that we've developed over time that we don't think people are really thinking about really the way people live. And a lot of houses, they really just don't adapt to your changing life conditions, whether it's, I have a baby and now I've outgrown my house. I've got an aging parent and they need to move. So I need to then sell my house. One of my spouse lost a job and now we don't have the income. We got to sell our house. We've got COVID, there's all these things that kind of people outgrow their houses and then they have to move. And, that doesn't foster the creation of a really sustainable community. And it's not economically sustainable either. Every time you kind of have a transition of ownership, there's, 7 or 10% of the value of the home is given away to real estate agents, closing costs, mortgages. So we really kind of into creating houses that can kind of adapt and grow with their occupants.
Yeah.
And I think that was, once again, it's been really rewarding. We did that first in the Remington court. We did it, yeah, in the Walker. We've done it in most all of our development projects in the past. And now it's been rewarding too. There's other developers that are also incorporating those concepts because they've been proven to add value.
But this is like something where it's almost like you had to develop it yourself to get the idea going, because no one was going to approach you with the idea of doing it. And generally, when developers generally already have an idea what they want to build when they approach the architect. I mean, the architects try to help, you know, guide them, but I feel like this is something that
there's
might be
definitely
hard.
a herd mentality to developers, at least the scale that we do, where
Yeah.
they see a market or product that is working and they don't really have much motivation to do it any differently. It's obviously development. A lot of it is about risk mitigation at the bottom line. And they're not willing, they don't see that it adds value, but it does add risk. I think from our standpoint, in the case of Remington Court, once again, when everyone else went under, we created a highly differentiated product with flex spaces that in that case actually mitigated against the risk. And prove that, a product when you're in a great market, anything's going to sell.
Yeah.
When you're in a crappy market, the only thing that's going to differentiate what you're selling is the location, which you don't have any control over by the time you're selling it, of course, and the price. So, to sell your units, you just got to keep lowering the price. If you have something that has some design value or has some functional value that someone else does not, that's always going to, you're going to separate yourself from the pack.
Yeah. Do you find that that doing development, speaking of risk, do you find that doing the development helps mitigate your risk as an architect a little bit? Like, or like, is it helping try to? I'm not trying to say it. One other question is it helping funding the architecture practice itself, but like also is it kind of helping guide things or balance things between the two ventures? Because you're still an architect for other people as well.
Yeah. I think we've got 11 or 12 people now, and the great majority, maybe 8 or 9 of us work for the architecture firm, primarily doing bigger projects for other people. Really, our architecture firm has now been focused for the last several years on high density urban housing, whether it's mixed use buildings, apartment buildings, some condominiums, maybe 50 to 150 units.
Yeah.
So instead of, I think it's good for us as an architecture firm to maybe do 4 or so large projects a year versus 40 small projects a year. And that really allows that really what that provides is the infrastructure of employees, the office, the bookkeeping, the accounting, legal, that, allows us to then do more creative work as a developer and really don't have to be constantly churning through new projects. We only really develop maybe a couple projects a year.
Right.
And frankly, the architecture firm pays my income. I make my living and pay my mortgage through the architecture firm, and typically take the proceeds from our development work and go buy land. Like, we also don't buy land. We generally don't have a mortgage on our land.
Right.
And that's another risk mitigation strategy to just, if the market tanks, you can wait it out.
Yeah. Yeah. Also, then are you able to use the ownership in the land as part of your capital stack and getting financing for construction loans?
Oh, certainly. Yeah, we use, in the capital stack, we'll use our architecture equity accounts toward it. We will be our own general contractor, which, doesn't really count for the equity stack or the capital stack. Once again, we still do co-development projects where we partner with existing landowners, use their equity in the land to buy down the construction loan. In fact, I'm doing that right now. We're going to start construction next month on a 4-unit project 2 doors down from me, where there's a house that my neighbor's has just been falling down for years and literally has a tarp on its roof right now. But she has a ton of equity in her land. She could sell her land for $800,000, but she can't buy anything in this neighborhood for $800,000.
Yep.
So she'd have to move. So in this case, we're going to use her equity in the land and our equity, sweat equity, as well as the general construction to build 4 new units. She's my 50-50 partner in the project. So she's going to get half the proceeds from the sale, use that money to then basically buy one of her own brand new units in the development project and maybe come at it with a $100,000 mortgage or something.
And then you don't have to actually go out and acquire land or look for land or bid on land or any
Yeah,
of
it's
that
been,
stuff.
it takes a long time to permit these things out here. We've been permitting for a year and a half, and
Wow.
I don't have a nickel in the land. I've been paying for the development cost, and she doesn't have the capital to pay an architect or pay the engineer or pay the fees, of course, the experience. So that's and we've done that probably 4 times, and I really, really like that model economically. It really, our cash on cash return is really great. And I just like, once again, the social values behind it, that people are not having, when you have gentrification and neighborhoods are changing, people feel like development is happening to them.
Yeah.
And this is a scenario where development is happening with them, and they have a stake in, the redevelopment of their land, and they end up getting basically one of the new units to their, bespoke unit, exactly the way, in her case, it's primarily on one level so that they can age in place in it. So I feel great about that. It's a win-win for everybody.
And like, so I feel interesting about that because, or there's an interesting thing about that because a lot of people have asked me about previously about the idea of partnering with somebody to do sweat equities, basically work for free as the architect, and especially if you are able to do the contracting as well, it's a whole different stack of money. But then what's been also interesting is a lot of people I know have been approached, and I've been approached since writing the book by developers who are like, hey, so you want to work for free, right? You want to do this free labor for for a speculative, because a lot of, the vast majority of developments that are trying to get off the ground, they don't happen anyways. It's somebody trying to figure out whether something pencils out or something is possible or they can get the financing for it or whatever else. But in order to do that, they need to spend money on somebody figuring all that out, doing the zoning, doing the as of rights kind of stuff, and figuring out how much something might cost, which is an expensive venture for somebody just to figure out something's not going to work or is going to work.
Yeah.
And so I guess whenever you do something like this, where you've done it multiple times now, you already know these people, or you already kind of feel like it's something that you're able to invest your time and your staff's time to go down that route, that it will be fortuitous at the end, or how do you gauge that?
Sometimes, like my neighbor down the street, obviously I knew her. I knew the family that owned the lot that we did what was it, the Walker. More recently, as we've been doing this and had some articles written about us, there's people that we don't know that have approached us that are interested in this same concept. We did a house or a project last year called the Steel Stack, where existing, this is a commercial site. He approached us, had this kind of small little commercial building in the front that over the last 70 years had been just one terrible addition to it after another. And we ended up basically short cladding that land and built 4 new units on the back half and kept the small little commercial one in front. And that project was a success. And now we actually, he took the proceeds from the sale of that project and then emailed us, said, hey, I found another lot down the street from me. So now we're partnered in a second project.
Wow. That's a beautiful, beautiful building.
Yeah, thanks. That was a lot of fun. And that really, that also has the ground floor kind of flex spaces. It's been really interesting to see once again, how people have used those flex spaces. They've used them in very creative ways during the pandemic. People were using them as home offices. We had actually one of the buyers had a learning pod in their flex space where their kids and 4 or 5 other kids were bringing in a tutor and turn their flex space into a classroom.
That's that's a great idea, especially for 2020, 2021, and hopefully not 2022.
And frankly, we talk about, kind of think about this all the time, like, particularly now. I mean, this has been a big reset that, if you would hopefully aspire to build a house that's going to be around in 100 years, or build a project. And how are things going to change in 100 years? Think how much they've changed in just the last 15 months.
Yeah.
and some for the bad, but some for the good. And certainly this communication we're having right now, I think would be for the good. And what does that really mean to how you live and how you work? That's really a fundamental thing. Right now, people are kind of still, now they're working in in the environment they also live in, and it doesn't always work well. We've got multiple people in my office who have both spouses working from home at the same time,
Yeah.
and kids at home, maybe going to school, and they're trying to do this all out of their existing house.
Yeah.
So how can we imagine, a living environment that could accommodate that in the future? And that, once again, that's a typical developer. They just don't think about those kind of things.
I feel like it makes acoustics.
Maybe that's
so
wrong. Maybe that's too disparaging. And I say a typical developer, but I think architects, we're trained, should be trained, and should be thinking about these things, not just the aesthetics of how something's going to look, and of course how it's going to function, but how it actually functions for people's lives. It's actually people that, of course, inhabit these things. And how do people spend their 24 hours a day? And how can we best have at least a living environment that can accommodate that or make that easier?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's I've always been a proponent of smaller and smaller houses. I'm also from Texas. I know I don't sound like it, but I'm, from big house land. And then, moving up to the Northeast, it's like, oh, I lived in Europe for a number of years, and moving to the Northeast, it's like the idea of getting smaller and smaller houses was appealing to me and my wife. And so we bought, I'm trying to follow your path here, Rob. We bought a house to renovate, and it's taking way, way, way too long to do all of this. It's still not done. The downstairs will hopefully be drywalled starting next week, or my wife will kill me. But our house is like 1,350 square feet because we were like, okay, small house, not too big, it's an 1890s kind of thing. But then now it seems like now everybody needs their own office, they need their own space. We need acoustic separation, which is even more important. And it doesn't always have to be space or volume to get that. If maybe our building materials and stuff were a little bit more robust. I think it's definitely making a lot of us rethink about how the spaces that we live in and what's inside of them, and where do we have to work, because or also getting much more comfortable with seeing people's Zooms with their beds behind them and all kinds of weird, awkward kind of.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, people get invited into people's houses. I mean, we're doing projects now where we just make an effort to say at the bottom of a stair landing, make it like 8 feet deep and put a big window facing outside to something pleasant, and have a little nook where you could put a desk there. Yeah. I mean, I think that's people don't really want to go hole away into a little 8 by 10 bedroom with a elliptical machine or something in it.
Yep.
You kind of find little places within the larger volumes of the house that actually make for better workspaces.
Yeah. So speaking of your house, so Jeremy took on the chat was asking about how you developed your own home, which I'm very interested in. So you got the FHA construction loan for that one?
Yeah.
And that's one of those where you put I think there's 3% or 3.5% down or something like this. Can you walk us through how that works?
Well, this was kind of an interesting scenario too, where I think when we finished Remington Court, there was I guess a small developer that approached us to design a house for him. We got kind of partly not very far through the design process, and he had another project that he was supposed to sell that some land he was supposed to sell that ended up being contaminated. He couldn't sell it. Now he was in a little bit of a financial difficulty and was having a hard time even meeting the mortgage on this land. So he kind of told me that let's stop this project. I'm looking to sell this land. And I said, well, maybe I'd buy that land from you. And I had just sold Remington Court, and so I had my whatever $65,000 or whatever it was back, 5,000, and probably put 20 of it to him as a non-refundable deposit, and then basically just paid his mortgage while we permitted it, and that helped him out. And then I wanted to do a modular house for myself, and we worked with a company called Gurdon, a big modular manufacturer in Boise, Idaho. They connected me with a modular lender, whose name I can't remember, in California. And basically they did FHA loans. It's kind of all they did.
And they
Um,
were specifically for modular construction, like
they were specific to modular, and the product that they had was an FHA loan.
and they didn't care where you were geographically, like the fact that you were states away.
No, no, they were in California. And didn't it was super smooth. And once again, this was a year that in the depths of the Great Recession, I think my income that year was like $25,000, and my wife was here's an architect with an income of $25,000 and a spotty track record as a developer. And my wife was an ICU nurse with a stable income. And yeah, we were able to, qualify for this FHA loan. I think it was a minimum of 3%. We might have ended up putting 5 or something like that.
Yeah.
And built the house with it. It kind of converted at the completion of the house directly into a permanent mortgage.
Yeah.
Which one of the drags about that, you have to pay mortgage insurance on that.
Yeah.
Which was a couple $100 a month, I think. And maybe after 2 years, I think we were able to refinance out of that. But anyway, once again, it took very little equity. The bottom line on the FHA loan is like as a owner occupant, this is a house, this is a loan that is set up less, speculatively and more to allow people of minimal means to get into their own house.
Yeah, I mean it's a really incredible program that I don't know if most people know about or know that it's even possible, especially with so much little down. I when I read about that, it said that you have to have a contractor that's on their list, like their FHA government list, or maybe the contractor just has to fill out paperwork and submit it. I was curious how you were able to get through that as the contractor.
I think that's certainly, yeah. I don't remember actually that being a problem. I think it, probably the fact that it was Gurdon. They built the great majority of the house was built in a factory.
Okay.
And I think Gurdon had a vested interest too, to working with a bank
Yeah.
that can provide, this loan. That's really where it all came about is Gurdon, probably had a hard time finding all these clients that wanted a modular home and had a hard time finding a lender that could make that happen on a case by case basis. So they form a relationship with this bank in California, who then helps facilitate that whole process.
Jesus. That's like really seamless and easy.
Yeah, it was. It was great. I mean, the Gurdon, I think I had signed a contract for, I can't remember what it was. Let me think. I don't know, maybe $200,000 or so to build the modular components of the house. And, when the house was delivered here, we paid that to the penny. There was zero cost overruns with the modular part of it.
What else? Then, when the modular part arrived on site, what else did you have to do to fit it out or finish it?
Well, we did the lowest floor is, it's kind of built to, not really into a hill, but the site has some topography, and we needed to provide a garage by code. So the lowest floor is in concrete and then has some stud frame walls within it for the garage. And there's actually another little ADU space down there. So that was all site built and kind of ready to go. So then the modules arrived. 6 modules, we craned them in place in one day. And, you have to kind of stitch them together. There was no siding. They were wrapped on the outside of the house, but we sided it here in place.
Yeah.
They can do a lot of houses where the entire kitchens and bathrooms are fitted out, but Gurdon is kind of a production assembly line. So things have to move very, very fast. So you're kind of wedded to the tile they choose and how they're going to do your kitchen. And we didn't necessarily want to use all that. So we actually ended up just finishing out the kitchen and the baths on site. The plumbing was here.
Or at least making it your own kind of thing.
Yeah. And, so putting in the floors, obviously when you have a modular house, you have all these little sections. So, some of the finishes that you look around and see were actually done on site, but the drywall was in, the windows were in, they were trimmed, everything you see here. Of course, this is the framing, it was in, all the electrical fixtures were in. Wow. It was mostly just the kitchens and baths that we finished on site. And frankly, you don't have to do that. Gurdon could have done that. We chose to do it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you have a lot more. You have a lot more interest in trying to make it look nice and designing certain aspects of it. to suit your lifestyle?
I mean, that's the fun part, frankly, of being a developer or being a general contractor is kind of doing that part of it. It's part of the great thing about being a general contractor is you have full creative and economic control of the project. And when you see, the great majority of that to a modular manufacturer somewhere, you lose a lot of that control architecturally, at least with the finish selection. I mean, there's kind of two types of factory. You have like literally Gurdon is a moving assembly line. And as a result, you can have very cost competitive work. And, it's still a custom designed house. I mean, I designed it for the site, for the view, for the solar orientation. But once it's designed, it moves through their factory quick in just a matter of days. The other type of modular manufacturing really is just building a custom house in a warehouse.
Yeah.
People move to it, and you can literally do anything you want to a high design and high specification, but it costs twice as much.
Right. So do you feel like your construction arm is an asset of hybrid overall then, or more of a necessity to get certain things completed?
Yeah, I think it's both. I mean, it's definitely a necessity, for a development company, and a necessity to continue to innovate. And, we constantly price different, with that steel stack, for instance, that was Corten siding. So we can figure out what the price is that, different depending on the profile of the siding, there's different costs associated with that. So it's nice to have that in-house to actually run through some pricing scenarios and work through a spec that is of high quality that can be done, affordably. It's a huge asset, frankly, to our architecture work, though, because we know how to get design value affordably.
Right.
We know what things cost, and we know what you can do as architects. And sometimes they're maybe just adding a lot of cost, but maybe not a whole lot of value.
Yeah, that seems to be a big problem with a lot of architects, especially younger mid-level architects who don't know the value of whatever they're drawing in terms of like how much it's going to cost to build or how much value it actually is going to get out of a project in the end. And that seems to be a problem unless you go out and actually know how to price things or get the price of things. And most of that stuff is actually quite transparent once you know where to look, once you know which lumber yard to call and do a takeoff on. It's like, oh, there's the number right there. It's pretty right in your face. But
yeah, it's not. And maybe it's, once again, it's like, what is the architecture profession, like when we say they're chasing value as an economic value, but I think really what we were talking about is, the larger picture of values from a social value.
Yeah.
Which really, I think what we've primarily focused on a house that maybe it might look a little bit different, but we really focus on something that's going to function different, respond different to the people that are inhabiting it.
Right. Larry Link is asking, he's saying, following your idea that development risks can actually be lower by utilizing innovative design or not following the pack, similar to what you're just saying here. What types of innovative development angles are you looking to pursue now?
Well, we've kind of continued our progression through the urban infill, typically townhouse projects here in Seattle, maybe 2 to 6 or 8 units. And I guess we've completed maybe 10 of those and have another 4 or 5 of them working through entitlement construction or you basically own the land. And, we continue, I guess, there's some innovative concepts on that we've already talked about. We also did develop a 41 unit apartment building that we finished about 3 years ago. And that was a whole different thing. That was right here in Seattle. That was all about
big
capital. And, we kind of did it the same way we typically do our other projects, mostly self-financed and then with the bank. But that was really scary. And the truth is, it's like that 41 unit project doesn't really, I was looking to provide some passive income, essentially.
So that was the one that you were renting out?
Yeah. That's called the Clover Lofts.
Right. Is that the Thomas Street Lofts or that's a different one?
Thomas Street Lofts. Yeah, we changed the name of it a couple times. So that one, and that one's got some pretty cool concepts of lofts and things like that. But it took a whole bunch of capital to do it. And the cash flow it provides is not all that great. And we were lucky that we finished it 4 years ago or 3 years ago and not when the pandemic was ramping up, that could have been a big problem, because people were fleeing the cities. And so actually more recently, what I'm developing now, I still like the idea of passive income and doing some different projects. I bought a piece of land in Sayulita, Mexico about 2 years ago, maybe 2.5, and we're doing a kind of, I don't know if I kind of call it an Airbnb or a boutique hotel
In Mexico?
in Mexico.
There's no risk there.
It's like, well, there's risk everywhere, but I
No, I
think
know, but like working between different. So then, yeah, now you're talking about different currencies, different laws, different like all sorts of stuff. Like,
I mean, these are Sayulita, Mexico is, I don't know if you know where it is. It's kind of near Puerto Vallarta, on the west coast, here. And it's a real destination for Seattleites, people from Vancouver, people from San Francisco. And they'll go there because it's really easy to get to. You can get on an airplane and fly to Puerto Vallarta in about 4.5 hours and get on a taxi or something and get out to Sayulita about 30 minutes later. So it's just got a booming, and this is like this pretty small little surf town with, a bustling Airbnb economy, and that we've been to a number of times. And, one of the guys that works for me, his parents had owned a house down there for years. He knew a guy, an expat that had been living down there for 10 years as a real estate agent. My wife loves travel. In fact, she's in Morocco right now leading a nursing retreat that she puts on in Morocco. So trying to find a way to kind of wed our passions of development and hers of travel. And we were, several years ago, we actually had plane tickets bought to go to Copenhagen, I think, because I hadn't been to Copenhagen.
I just got back from there last month. It is amazing.
I know. I traveled around Europe all over the place when I graduated from college, and I didn't make it to Copenhagen. So I've always wanted to go. So we were going to go there. And we just feel like, you know what, knowing that these projects, they take 3 years to do. I'm 52 years old. If we're going to do this jumping off point, let's do it. So we just decided to cancel the trip to Copenhagen. Instead, we went down to Sayulita with the intent of looking at and buying land, reached out to this real estate agent that we had a contact with, and literally bought a piece of land that weekend. And he ended up introducing us to his wife, the real estate agent's wife. No, what was it? His kids went to an American school down there. One of the teachers at the American school was married to an architect down there with a company called Palma, which themselves actually just won, an award through the Architectural League of New York this year. They're doing awesome work, and connected me with him. And it's been actually extremely seamless. It's been one of the most, seamless development processes we've ever done, where we designed it collaboratively, or we took the lead on that. Palma acted as the architect of record, got it entitled, through the permitting process. They hooked us up with the general contractor who's, actually kept it on time and on budget. And it's been freaking fun.
So, so wildly similar. My wife and a group of her friends and us have all ended up buying into a timeshare in Cabo San Lucas at the very tip of Baja Peninsula. And it's a resort that somebody found a long time ago, where in the 1950s, an architect from California moved down to Baja, figured out that it was going to be a future resort area, kind of before all the resorts were starting to pop up. So he built himself a little timeshare resort, or maybe this is the 70s and 80s. It is wildly different than any other resort over there. And since then, Cabo's been built up more and more and more. A lot of people go to Cabo for spring break and everything else, but there's this one club called Club Cascadas that just really looks like you're in Indonesia at some really unique designed thing. And the architect basically built it with, I don't know how many, it's maybe 30 units in it, where the very front prime unit overlooking the ocean that has massive amounts of rooms and jacuzzi and whatever is his unit that he basically got out by funding. He was able to get that for free by building all of the other units that is leased out to all of these people, including us now. It's this crazy story of a guy that basically just wanted to have his own resort and place to travel to with his family every year.
Well, maybe he recognized once again the opportunity. I think that what I knew from having gone down to Sayulita a number of times, it's a very popular place to go. But, a lot of your housing options there, like on Airbnb, you'd have people that build a house 20 years ago in Mexico,
Yeah.
and it's really very similar to the house that you live in here or whatever that would be built in the suburbs with a big sofa and a TV and
You don't feel
not
like you're on
very inspiring.
vacation.
Yeah, and you didn't have, and then there were a few kind of boutique hotel options, but not much. And we realized, of course, the power, number one, of Airbnb, but also of Instagram.
Yeah.
So we wanted to create something that was, and we knew the people that went there because they're the same people that buy or rent for us up here. They're generally creative types that buy or live in our product up here in Seattle, and those are the same types that go down there.
Yeah.
And a lot of these people, they have, frankly, they have good incomes, they have money, and they want to stay in something cool. And I don't think there's any risk. I mean, as an architect, there is zero risk. Well, I wouldn't say zero. There's actually, there's always risk, but there's definitely, as an architect, when you're doing a vacation rental, there's incentive to create something far out.
Yeah.
People don't, they're on vacation. You want to provide an experience, and we feel like that experience was not being provided in Sayulita. So that was really our takeoff point for selecting the land and then the subsequent design of the product. And it is going to live quite a bit differently than most houses will. So I'm super excited about it. I'll be down there in a couple of weeks. But and once again, we did a Zoom call with the team yesterday. It's freaking fun. I think I was sitting here in my living room. We had someone else on our team here in Seattle, but we're zooming in with the construction manager down in Sayulita, one of the partners in Palma. She was in Madrid, Spain, but now she just recently moved to Copenhagen. And these are the kind of things that have happened over the last couple of years. And I think that, we as professionals can embrace, this communication really kind of expands where we had been just very geographically tied literally to our own neighborhood.
Yeah.
To a much, much broader area.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's just fun working with other people in different cultures and different languages. It's been super rewarding. And, and I think it's actually going to be financially, our projections are it should be much more successful, frankly, than an apartment building is up here. And the very worst thing that could happen is I'll just have some far out cool place in Mexico for me and my friends to go visit.
To run off to whenever Seattle gets hit again with all the COVID crap, and you're just like, I'm out.
Well, not to mention Seattle is, like you might have heard, it's pretty dreary here in the winter. It's beautiful today, but the winter is pretty long. You get into January and you haven't really seen the sun in 30 days.
Go back to the Texas Panhandle.
It gets to be long. Well, that's dreary in its own way too.
I think so. One last question from Nate is, can Robert talk about the challenges of setting up a construction company as an architect, insurance and errors and omissions issues, etc.?
Well, legally we have hybrid architecture, assembly, and development, and they're really three separate LLCs, and they have their own insurance companies and their own liability. So you really need to kind of keep each of those entities siloed so that some liability issue on the one doesn't drag down the rest of them.
And then you have contracts between each one of them then? Like the hybrid development is hiring architecture and is hiring construction?
Yeah, we literally write contracts to ourselves. In fact, we pay ourselves. Our own development projects, I write a contract from the architecture firm, and the architecture firm gets paid for it.
And for tax reasons, that's also a good thing? Like there's benefits on...
Well, it allows us to, number one, to actually report our equity contribution as a real contribution, but also in the architecture firm, we have some profit sharing, and we have, other people that help manage that business, and they're interested in the profitability of that business. So I don't want to, I like to use those resources, and we do use those resources, but I don't want to do it at the expense of that company. And I think from a financial standpoint, I really try to keep all three businesses solvent and profitable.
Yeah.
I don't, if there's a business that you have, if I had the construction business and it wasn't just making some money on its own right, then
the IRS is definitely gonna
probably shouldn't be doing that either. So it is like, once again, we have an insurance provider that we had with the architecture firm. We talked to them. Now we're having a construction company. They're providing the same insurance. And actually in Washington State, it's super easy to become a general contractor. I had mentioned that it took me 6 years I guess it took me 11 years total to become an architect between school and interning. I think it went down to the courthouse and with a check for $63 to buy a bond, and I became a general contractor the same day.
Yeah, that's how I own a construction company here in New York, and I basically just wrote a letter to the state, whatever, and then I went to the local bank and opened up a bank account, and then there I was.
I mean, it is hard. The construction company is hard. I mean, of the three businesses, that might be the one that I take the least pleasure in.
But you only
'Cause
do
it-
construction for yourself, right?
Yeah, no, that's not true. We kind of have a niche. The construction company builds small apartment buildings for other people. We're
Oh,
also
wow.
built like 15 unit apartment buildings. We just finished one. We actually just started a second. These are projects, little apartments they're kind of they're way too small for the big companies, but they're too big and complicated for like a typical townhouse builder. There's a lot of codes associated with an apartment that you wouldn't have in a townhouse or a single family house. But we know the codes because we're the architect. And they have nice economy of scale to them. And frankly, they're easier for us to build from a standpoint of there's not super highly custom details. You have to, once again, this is where it's really leveraged, as an architect, when you're starting this project, know what it's going to cost to build it.
Yeah.
And so we it's a true design build service in those cases.
Wow. And you said that the banks in your development projects, the banks have realized the architectural equity in your capital stack. Like, is that part of the contracts between the architecture, your architecture office and your development office? You're basically saying how much value you've spent or how much you've billed your development to your architect or vice versa, and then basically you take that amount to the bank and say that this is already money that's been paid. These are the invoices, kind of thing.
I mean, it's part of the capital stack, but normally, what the bank will loan you is of course, they're going to loan you loan to value or loan to cost. So it really seems that it's either the value, the appraised value has a bigger impact on that, or the construction cost. And once again, we also just kind of our model, we generally buy our land with cash to not get over. I mean, having gone through the recession, I saw lots of small developers get overextended
Yeah.
and go belly up. And I've always used the development company as, a side hustle. It's kind of a successful side hustle, and I spend a lot of time with it.
It's getting big.
But it's like, but I don't want to get overextended, and I can just stop doing development for a few years, which I have, if the economy's in a rut, and just work through it as an architect. So that's a great thing. It's like, you have kind of two businesses or three businesses that are, that can support one another. And we've also had times when the economy has started going down, and we'll take a lot of the people that work for us. So the architecture firm have design build background themselves, or even have owned, our site manager for our construction company is also a licensed architect. And in slow times for the architecture firm, we'll take people from the architecture firm and we'll have them manage one of the construction projects.
Yeah.
And then when we need someone, and working vice versa, back and forth. So that's certainly beneficial, I think, for everybody.
Yeah. It seems to align a lot of the interests and consolidate professions in a really nice way.
Yeah, it's been an interesting and rewarding ride.
Do you have any last advice for anybody that's trying to think about getting into this, or any warnings or?
Well, I probably already put out a couple of warnings of just be careful to get over leveraged. We ourselves basically, stick with, modest sized projects where we don't have to bring in outside investors. Probably one of the things I enjoy most about development is I truly am my own boss as the architect. When we're designing other people's things, I'm responsible to them and their money and their investors. And as the projects get bigger and bigger, there's more stress associated with that to perform.
Yeah.
And do a great job. And not only a nice building, but a building that can, of course, be built for a budget that, works with their pro forma. So there's a lot of, there is risk associated with development, but it's typically self-inflicted. and related to becoming over leveraged. And also, you cannot discount, the black swan events. That happens. It's happened. In my profession, I've had a .com boom, and a year after two after that, we had 9/11 event, and then the year after that, here in Seattle, we had an earthquake, and then 6 years later, we had the Great Recession, and then 5 years later than that, maybe more. What was it? Yeah, 7 years. Now we've had a pandemic.
Yeah.
And these things happen, and they're actually not that rare. They're always a little different. And those are the things that take you down.
Yeah.
Is really if you're over leveraged and something like that happens, that will take you down.
Yeah.
So that's where, like, knowing that it's sooner or later it's going to happen, and I'm having sleepless nights wondering when the next earthquake is going to hit. We probably put more capital into it than we have to, and borrow less money than we have to, and sleep better at night.
Just be a little less risk adverse.
All that said, I would say it's not actually it's really not all that difficult. It's not at the scale that we work. If you made it through architecture school or you're an architect, you know so much already about what goes into development. The scale we work, people that are coming out of development, or a lot of our competitors are builders, and maybe their dad was a builder, or maybe they had a framing company and then they bought a land and then they became a developer.
Yeah.
But they don't have any history of architecture. They don't know the process nearly as well. As an architect, you can identify sites and opportunities much, much easier. You don't have to pay anyone to do it. So you can evaluate 10 sites, make 10 offers on land, and maybe only take, don't have to worry if only one of them gets accepted.
Yeah.
And that's where, like, when you get into the larger projects, apartment buildings, you're working with other people's money. Now the people that work in that, they came out of finance background, and that's much harder, I think. I wouldn't say I'm not interested, but I'm not a finance guy, and I like the buildings. I like the physical buildings, and I like the communities, and I think that kind of the projects we're developing are kind of direct conduit to those goals.
Yeah, that seems to be the backgrounds of most developers. Is either they're the builder side and they're maybe on the smaller scale of things, or there's the finance guy side, which tends to be on the larger scale of things, or commercial real estate, or something.
And also, build where and build for your friends. I mean, the thing that I always think about is like any project. The litmus test I have when starting a new project or designing a project is like, would I actually live in this project at some period of my life? If this is an apartment rental, would I see myself renting it? And if so, what would I want to live in? What could I afford to pay?
Yeah.
And if I'm going to buy something, where's the neighborhood I would want to live, and what would I want to see in that? Because it's generally people, and through my career, through my 30s and 40s, it's really creative types that we generally sell to. So think about what you would want or what your friends would want. And certainly in the creative community in Seattle, people are not building for sale product that those people want.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's the real opportunity. And we work in our own neighborhood. I walk to work, and when I walk to work, it's probably a mile and a half. And I think I depending on which way I go, I can walk by half dozen of my projects. So that's fun too, and rewarding.
Yeah. That sounds like a pretty ideal walk.
It isn't. Sometimes, you see something, you're like, the landscaping's not doing well.
Or some detail doesn't hold up quite right.
Yeah, or you have these buyers, and of course you're responsible to them too, and you're like, the rain hood's not working. You're like, all right, we'll get someone out there.
Get the intern architect out there.
Yeah. So
awesome. Well, thanks a lot, Rob, for taking the time for this and everything. I really appreciate it. It was good to talk to you again. I love learning about all your stuff. Your work is amazing. Everybody in here should check out hybridarch.com. It's gorgeous stuff. I didn't even talk about
we have another website too called Hybrid Develop. not development, but hybriddevelop.com that is only has our development projects. And unfortunately, I don't think our Saulito one is on there on any of our websites right yet, but we have the one at the top, I think, called the Oak and the Alder that's under construction now. We're just about to start siting that one. And, one of those 2 units is pre-sold. Actually, it was with a couple that was moving from Copenhagen. They were just following our work through Instagram and through whatever. And she's founding a gaming company here in Seattle. And, we'll send out a text alert, got a new project starting, so people are aware of it. And that one's been pre-sold for several months.
Did that pre-sale help finance the construction loan?
No, we had already kind of just started it,
Okay.
but certainly it's nice. It's nice for them. It's great now. We were customizing some of the tile and some of the interior finishes and kitchen, and for them, it's kind of turning a speculative project into a custom design project for them. And once again, kind of reducing our risk and be able to provide a differentiated product and somehow get that out there to the public.
Yeah, it's great. It's really great work, man.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Really appreciate it. Well, and you're a big time thought leader in this architect as developer thing. So I admire and respect what you've been doing. And I appreciate you reaching out to me again to do this, because I think you've inspired a lot of other people to do the same.
Hopefully not all go bankrupt.
Well, I mean, you can go bankrupt as an architect. There's a million ways to go bankrupt.
That's true. That's what people don't
you
think
probably
about.
will not go bankrupt is just to work forever for someone else.
Yeah, that's the most risky.
And that path is always
thing.
available, and that path will always be available. You could always, if I ever got tired of this or went bankrupt, I still have an incredible skill set to work for someone else.
And right now,
I really don't. I do not want to. I shouldn't even say that. There's no. That'd be the worst thing in the world, I think, to go.
On that note, Rob is hiring. He's got two job positions on his website.
I think we filled the one.
It's awesome.
You know what we need, if anyone is local, what we actually need is a seasoned on-site carpenter for the general construction company.
And with an architecture background? Or
No.
not with an architecture background. I know a guy that used to work at Gluck Plus who did move to Seattle right at the start of COVID. He just ran off back to Seattle. His parents were from Seattle.
Well, we have hired in the past people, that maybe have an architecture degree, and we hire them specifically for the construction company. But it's really hard to be on a job site and to be in an office and work kind of productively in both.
Yeah.
So normally, you have to really commit to the construction side of design build, and our site super has committed to that. He actually worked at Gluck too. Andy Fawcett, who's our site super, he worked at Gluck several years ago, and he was I think he was in North Carolina doing a big project there, and then he moved back to Seattle because his wife's family is from Seattle, and we hired him.
Yeah.
But he committed to the construction side of it, and he's doing an incredible job. But now we need a second person strictly committed to the. We sub most everything out but there's always miscellaneous things that fall through the cracks that you need someone to take care of. And frankly, those people are hard to find.
Right now, it's very difficult to find. Like even just general conditions kind of stuff on site is getting really difficult and really expensive. I don't know. Like when I'm renovating this house, it stopped making sense hiring somebody else to do it when I was paying them all of my wages to do that. It was like, wait, you're getting so expensive that I can just quit my job and do this myself, and it's actually somehow cheaper.
Yeah, things are just becoming very, very expensive. I mean, I think we used to develop a project. A cheap builder could build something for $100 a square foot, and we'd build it for 130 or something. And now we're in an environment where a cheap builder could build something for $275, and we build it for $325.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's very, very expensive. And of course, land is also in the same, and once again, I don't think it's a good thing. It's a bad thing, but the cost of housing has also appreciated that same amount.
Yeah.
So the risk is at some point there could be a correction in that. And it's not sustainable. Frankly, it's not good. It's not good for things here in Seattle to grow as they have grown over the last 10 years. It's not, we have big issues now that we weren't confronted with to the level we are now, with displacement and homelessness, and just the ability of, and people are moving further and further south, the neighborhoods we used to develop in. Frankly, our creative buyers have been priced out of those neighborhoods. So our newest projects are actually further south as well. We've kind of followed our buyers a little bit further out of the central business core.
Right.
Because we're just always interested in kind of the creative buildings to the creative class, and not, the stuff in the central business core now is super highly custom luxury. I'm not a big proponent of that.
Right. Yeah, I don't know what's going to happen moving forward in America, because there's a big disconnect between what's out there and what a lot of people can afford.
Well, once again, that's the architects. We're not a passive player in this. We are an active player and can actually affect change. But the architect is a service provider working at the service of their developer client. If you really want to impact your communities, I think you could do it as a developer, and maybe, at the scale of us doing 2 projects a year, we're not really making a dent in housing production. But I think if you can create some new ideas and inspire other people to do the same, and frankly, the things like the flex houses, the Airbnb opportunity, the work from home opportunity, those are ways actually that can kind of mitigate the high cost of housing.
Yeah.
By having, other potential income stream, or be able to use your home as a work environment more efficiently.
Yeah, or school.
Or school.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I'll let you get back to your work, Rob. Really appreciate taking the time.
Thank you, James, for the opportunity, and thank you to everyone else out that joined us today.
Yeah, thanks, guys. If you got anything else, just send me a message or anything. See you guys later.
Bye-bye.